The hospital room smelled of carbolic acid and dying men. February snow pressed against the window, thick as cotton batting, muffling the sounds of Huron, South Dakota beyond. Inside the radiator, hissed and clanked, fighting a battle it could never win against the cold that seeped through every crack in the old building's bones. Einar Thorvaldsen lay in the narrow bed, his breath coming in wet, labored pulls. 83 years old. 11 Dakota winters survived before most men even arrived in the territory. 29 more after the one that should have taught him everything. The pneumonia had him now. Not the cold, not the wind, just fluid-filling lungs that had breathed in 40 years of prairie dust and wood smoke, and the particular silence that comes after burying your neighbors. Two visitors sat at his bedside. Martha Morrison Walker, 36, a school teacher with her mother's serious eyes and her father's careful hands. Eric Morrison, 33, an engineer who had traveled from Boston with equations in his head and questions in his heart. They had come because Einar asked, not requested, asked. There was a difference. Martha held a notebook, pen poised. Eric leaned forward, elbows on knees, watching the old man's face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize something before it vanished forever. Einar's eyes opened, blue as winter ice, sharp despite the fever. "You came," he said. His voice was gravel shifted by wind. "You asked us to," Martha said gently. "You said you wanted to tell us something about our mother." "About the wall," Eric added. Einar's laugh turned into a cough that racked his frame. When it subsided, he lay back on the ceiling. "Not about the wall, about me, about what I did and what I didn't do." He turned his head to look at them directly. "I was 54 years old that summer. The summer your mother came to Dequemone with 2 children and not a single cord of firewood to her name. I had survived 11 winters, buried my wife, buried neighbors who didn't listen. I knew Dakota, I knew the cold, and I knew who would die." Martha's pen moved across the page in careful script. "Your mother arrived in August of 1887, a widow from Boston, 29 years old, weighed maybe 115 pounds soaking wet, hands soft as a baby's, 2 small children, no husband, no experience, and a cabin with walls so thin I could see daylight through the chinking." He paused, gathering strength. "I rode over there on a morning when the temperature was already climbing toward 90, looked at that empty patch of dirt where a woodpile should be, looked at those children, looked at your mother, and I did the math." His eyes closed. "I told her she was going to die, told her those children would freeze in their beds, told her to sell the claim and go back east where there were people who could help her." Eric shifted. "But she didn't go." "No," Einar's voice dropped. "She didn't go, and because she was stubborn, and because I was proud, and because that winter was the cruelest I ever saw, 29 people that died within 20 miles of my farm, and I could have saved at least half of them." The words hung in the antiseptic air. Martha's pen stopped moving. "You think their deaths were your fault?" Einar opened his eyes. "I don't think, I know. I knew the storm was coming, felt it in my bones, saw the signs, and I only warned 2 people. Johann Berglund, who didn't listen, and your mother who did." He coughed again, harder. When he could speak, his voice was barely a whisper. "I want you to write the truth, not the story people tell at church socials, not the legend about the brave widow who survived. The truth, that your mother was a hero, that I was a fool, and that those 29 people, those children who walked to school in sunshine and never came home, they died because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong." Martha leaned closer. "What do you want us to write, Mr. Thorvaldsen?" Einar looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. "Everything, from the beginning. From the day I met Catherine Morrison, the day I committed the greatest sin of my life." He took a shaking breath. "I was right, but I was wrong, and I want you to understand the difference." The snow continued to fall outside. Inside, an old man began to speak, and 2 listeners began to understand that some stories are less about survival than about the cost of certainty. "Let me start," Einar said, "with what I knew about Dakota, and what I thought I knew about widows. The summer of 1887 came to the territory like a blessing disguised as a curse. Hot, dry, The kind of heat that made wheat grow tall and fast that convinced newcomers this land was manageable. That whispered lies about gentle winters and easy living. Einar Thorvaldsen's farm sat 3/4 of a mile northeast of the Morrison claim. 160 acres. A real house, not a cabin. Barn, outbuildings, the visible proof that a man could carve something permanent from emptiness if he knew what he was doing and didn't make stupid mistakes. He had arrived in '76 when Dakota Territory was still truly wild. Brought Ingrid, his wife, who lasted 5 years before the hard winter of '81, took her and their stillborn child in the same frozen February night. Since then, Einar had lived alone farming with grim efficiency, helping neighbors when he could, burying them when he couldn't. The community called him an elder. He was 54. But 11 Dakota winters aged a man in ways that had nothing to do with calendar years. He had learned the rules. 5 cords of firewood, minimum 6 better. Cut in summer, split in fall, stacked where you could reach it when snow buried the world. Keep livestock close. Store food for 3 months minimum. Never trust a warm spell after Christmas. Never assume you had enough of anything. And never ever underestimate the cold. That was the lesson he had learned watching Olaf and Anna Larson freeze in their bed the previous January. A young couple, strong, prepared they thought with 3 cords of good elm. Einar had warned them, told them it wasn't enough. Olaf had smiled confident in his strength, certain he could cut more if needed. When Einar found them, the furniture was gone, burned for heat. Part of the wall had been torn away, the logs fed into the stove in desperate failing attempts to stay warm. Olaf's hands were bloody from trying to break through the ice seal on the door, trying to reach the woodpile outside that might as well have been on the moon. From that day forward, Einar knew something with absolute clarity. People didn't die in Dakota winters because of bad luck. They died because of arrogance, because they thought they were special, because they believed the rules didn't apply to them. So when he saw smoke rising from the Morrison cabin that August morning, when he remembered hearing that Anders Morrison had died in June when he calculated widow plus 2 children, plus no visible woodpile, he knew exactly what he was looking at. A death sentence waiting to be executed by the cold. He could have ridden past, could have let nature take its course, could have saved himself the effort of delivering a warning that probably wouldn't be heeded anyway. But then he would have to dig 3 graves come spring, and he was tired of digging graves. He turned his horse toward the Morrison claim. The cabin was smaller up close than it had appeared from a distance, 12 feet by 14. Log walls with mud chinking that was already cracking in the August heat. A single window facing south. A cast iron stove visible through the open door squatting in the corner, like something waiting to be fed and never satisfied. No woodpile, not even kindling, stacked against the wall. A woman emerged from the doorway as Einar approached. She was thin, dressed in black that had faded to charcoal gray in the prairie sun. Dark hair pulled back severe. Eyes that watched him with the wariness of someone who had learned that men on horseback rarely brought good news. 2 children appeared behind her. A girl, maybe 6, with her mother's serious expression. A boy, younger, clinging to his sister's skirt. Einar did not dismount. It was a calculated choice. Height gave authority, and what he was about to say required authority. "How much wood do you have?" His voice carried across the yard flat and hard. The woman blinked. "I'm sorry, but..." "Firewood." "How much do you have stored?" She glanced behind her at the empty space where a woodpile should tower. "None, and yet I'm planning to begin cutting soon." "None, not much, or working on it." "None." Einar felt the familiar weariness settle over him, the exhaustion of having to explain obvious things to people who refuse to see. "A Dakota winter requires 5 cords minimum," he said. 6 is better. "Do you know what a cord looks like?" She shook her head. He explained. 4 feet high, 4 feet deep, 8 feet long, 128 cubic feet. 3,000 pounds of good elm, maybe more. 5 cords meant 15,000 pounds of timber. Cut, split, stacked, dried. "You have 10 weeks before the first hard freeze," he continued. "Do you know how to fell a tree?" "No." "Do you know how to buck a log, split round seasoned greenwood?" "No." Her voice was steady, but he saw color rising in her cheeks. Embarrassment or anger. Maybe both. Einar looked at the children. The girl had moved to stand in the doorway, one arm around her brother. Both watched him with wide eyes. He looked back at the woman and something moved in his chest. Not pity. He had learned pity was useless in Dakota. Mathematics, cold calculation, the numbers that could not be argued with. I buried my neighbors last January, he said. Olaf and Anna Larson. They had 3 cords when the cold came. It wasn't enough. They burned their furniture by Christmas. By New Year's, they were burning the walls. He let that image settle. They had 3 cords, Mrs. Morrison. They had experience. The husband was strong, and I found them frozen in their beds. The woman's face went pale, but she didn't look away. Einar continued relentless. A widow cannot cut 5 cords alone. You will run out of wood by February, and those children will freeze in their beds. He gestured toward the empty land stretching in all directions. Sell the claim. Take whatever you can get. Go back to where there are people who can help you. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, I have nowhere to go. Then it would be better to die in Boston with family than to freeze alone on this prairie with 2 children crying beside your body. He turned his horse. Behind him, he heard no protest, no argument, just silence. As he rode away, Einar told himself he had done his duty, given fair warning. If she was foolish enough to stay, that was her choice. He could not save people who refused to be saved. But he looked back once. She was still standing there in the August heat, staring at the empty space where 15,000 pounds of firewood needed to be. A woman alone with 2 children and a problem that arithmetic said could not be solved. By his calculation, she was already dead. He would check back in October, he decided. By then she would have sold and left. They always did when the first real cold arrived and the reality of winter became something more than abstract threat. He was certain of it. That certainty would haunt him for the rest of his life. September came with cooler nights and the first whispers of what was building beyond the horizon. The grass began to turn from gold to gray. Geese flew south in formations that darkened the sky. The angle of sunlight changed, slanting lower, offering less heat even at midday. Johan Bergland rode up to Einar's farm on a morning when frost still lingered in the shadows. 24 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of young man the territory needed, strong and willing to learn. He had arrived the previous year, survived his first winter, and was preparing for his second with the kind of methodical care that Einar approved of. Mr. Thorvaldsen, Johan called as he dismounted. I wanted to show you my preparations. Make sure I'm doing it right. They rode together to Johan's claim, 2 miles east. The cabin was larger than Morrison's, 16 by 20, solid construction. And along the south wall, stacked in neat rows, sat 6 cords of seasoned elm. Einar walked the length of the pile, checking the wood. Dry, well split, properly stacked to allow air circulation. Enough to last 2 winters if the young man was careful. You did well, Einar said. It was high praise from him. Johan grinned. I learned from you, sir. Last year you told me I needed 5 cords. I cut 4 and nearly ran out in March. This year I cut 6. I won't make the same mistake twice. You're the kind of man who survives in Dakota, Einar said. Someone who learns from his errors. They walked back toward the cabin. Johan glanced west toward the Morrison claim. What about the widow, Mrs. Morrison? I heard she's trying to prepare a loan. Einar's expression darkened. She'll die. Can't you help her? The question carried an implicit judgment. Einar heard it clearly. I can help people who want to help themselves, he said, voice hard. People who listen to advice, who are willing to do the hard work. But I cannot save people who refuse to be saved. Dakota will teach her, or kill her. There is no third path. Johan looked uncomfortable. There are children. I know, Einar said. That's why I told her to sell and leave. But she didn't listen. So the blood of those children is not on my hands. Johan mounted his horse, troubled. As he rode away, Einar watched him go and felt something approaching satisfaction. Johan Bergland, a good young man, doing everything right. He would survive. He would thrive. He was Dakota's future. The confidence Einar felt in that moment would become, in hindsight, unbearable. The word reached him through Clara Lindquist, a Swedish woman who homesteaded 3 miles south with her husband. She arrived at Einar's farm on a cool September afternoon, agitated and confused. You need to come see what Mrs. Morrison is doing, she said without preamble. She sold the claim, Einar asked. No, worse, she's building a woodpile inside her house. Einar blinked. What? Clara explained. Kate Morrison had managed to cut and haul roughly 1 cord of wood so far, painfully slow progress. But instead of stacking it outside in the traditional manner, she was stacking it inside the cabin, along the north wall, floor to ceiling. She says her grandmother in Norway did it that way, Clara said, shaking her head. I told her Norway isn't Dakota, but she won't listen. Einar felt something between pity and anger rise in his chest. Pity because the woman was clearly broken by grief, her mind unable to think clearly. Anger because her madness would kill 2 innocent children. Norway is not Dakota, he agreed. I told her she'll have no room to move. The children will have nowhere to play. And if that wood isn't seasoned properly, it will rot and bring insects. How much wood does she have total? Maybe 1.5 cords, if she's lucky. 1.5 cords. She needed 5. There were 6 weeks until the first hard freeze. Mathematically impossible. Let her do it, Einar said. When her children die from their mother's madness, the community will learn a lesson. Clara stared at him, shocked. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. I warned her. She didn't listen. So let Darwin do his work. But that night alone in his house, the house that had been built for 2 and now held only 1, Einar lay awake thinking about 2 children he had never met. Martha and Eric Morrison, 6 and 4 years old. He thought about Ingrid, about the child they had lost, about the silence in rooms meant for laughter. He told himself it wasn't his fault. He had warned her. He had told the truth. If she was too foolish to hear it, that was her failure, not his. But sleep did not come easily. And in the dark hours before dawn, a voice that sounded uncomfortably like his dead wife's whispered a question he did not want to answer. What if you're wrong? Tober brought Reverend Harold Gunderson to Einar's door. 48 years old, a Lutheran minister who served the scattered Scandinavian settlements across 50 miles of prairie. His word carried weight in the community. When Gunderson spoke, people listened. He sat at Einar's table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, face troubled. I need your counsel, he said, about the Morrison widow. What about her? The community is concerned. She's filling her home with firewood instead of preparing properly. Some believe grief has affected her judgment. Grief has affected her judgment, Einar confirmed. Gunderson leaned forward. Then it is our duty as the men of this community to intervene, for the sake of those children. Something cold moved through Einar's chest. Intervene how? I can petition, find a suitable family for Martha and Eric, a family with 2 parents, where they'll be safe. The words were calm, reasonable, and they made Einar's hands tighten on his own coffee cup. You want to take her children. I want to save them from dying. Einar stared at the minister. Gunderson was right by every measure of logic. Kate Morrison could not survive. The children would die. Better to separate them now, give them a chance with a family that could provide. But something in him rebelled. Reverend, he said slowly, I told Mrs. Morrison she would die. I believe it. But taking a mother's children while she's still alive, still fighting, that isn't justice. That's cruelty. Sometimes cruelty is kindness. And sometimes men who think they know best are the most dangerous of all. Einar set down his cup. Give her until November. If she still doesn't have enough wood, if she still won't sell, then you can petition. Gunderson was not happy, but he nodded. November, no longer. After he left, Einar sat alone at the table trying to understand his own reaction. Why had he defended her? He didn't know her, didn't like her decisions, thought she was mad. The answer came slowly, uncomfortable in its honesty. Because he was tired of being right. Because being right wasn't the same as being good. And because perhaps some small part of him wanted someone to prove him wrong. Wanted to believe that certainty wasn't the same as wisdom. He went to bed that night with the question still unanswered. Late October brought the broken cart. Einar was riding past the James River timber when he saw it. A handcart lying on its side, wood scattered across the frozen ground. And sitting beside the wreckage, face in her hands, was Kate Morrison. His first instinct was to ride on. Not his problem, not his responsibility. She had made her choices. But he stopped, dismounted, walked over. The cart broke, he said, stating the obvious because he didn't know what else to say. She didn't look up. The spoke snapped. He examined the damage. The spoke had fractured. The hub was cracked. 4 hours of work lay in the mud, and the cart that had carried it was ruined. Silence stretched between them. It can be fixed, Einar heard himself say. You'll need cottonwood for a new spoke. I have some at my farm. She finally looked up. Her face was streaked with tears and dust and exhaustion. Why are you helping? You said I was going to do. The question was fair, direct, deserved an honest answer. I still think you will, he said, but that doesn't mean I have to watch you cry by the roadside. I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. Eggs in the spring, if you're alive to collect them. The words were harsh, but his hands were already moving, checking the cart, calculating what would be needed for repair. Wait here, he said. I'll get tools and wood. He rode back to his farm, loaded his wagon with supplies, and returned to find her still sitting beside the broken cart, staring at the scattered wood as if it were pieces of a puzzle she no longer knew how to solve. He worked in silence. She watched. When he finished, the wheel turned, barely held together by a green cottonwood spoke that would not last many more trips. This won't hold much longer, he said, not looking at her. You need a better cart, or you need to stop trying to haul 200 pounds of wood alone. I don't have a choice. The words sparked something in him. Frustration burst out before he could stop it. You have a choice. Sell the land. Take $50, $100 if you're lucky. Buy a train ticket to Boston. Live with family. Those children will survive. Her voice when it came was quiet but firm. And live on charity, on pity, knowing I gave up the land my husband died to protect. No. I would rather die here as my own master than live in Boston as a burden. Einar stared at her. For the first time, he saw something beyond foolishness. He saw pride. The same pride that had kept him in Dakota through 11 brutal winters. The same pride that killed people and saved them in equal measure. Pride doesn't keep you warm in January, Mrs. Morrison. No, she said, but it keeps my heart beating. He left then, troubled in ways he could not name. That night, looking at his own woodpile, 8 cords stacked along the barn, enough for 2 winters, more than he needed, Einar found himself thinking about widows and children and the price of certainty. If he gave her wood, he would be prolonging the inevitable. She would still die, just later, and he would be partly responsible. But if he didn't give her wood and she died, he would remember her face beside that broken cart, would remember that he could have helped, and chose not to. The next morning, he loaded half a cord of seasoned elm into his wagon. He drove to the Morrison cabin without telling anyone. Kate came to the door, surprise clear on her face. I brought you something, Einar said, gruff, defensive. I have extra. Consider it a trade. Eggs in spring. She looked at the wood. Her throat worked, but no sound came. Don't thank me, he cut her off. Half a cord won't save you. You still need 2 more cords minimum, and I still think you'll die, but maybe I'm tired of burying neighbors. He unloaded the wood quickly, efficiently. When he finished, he stood awkwardly, aware he had crossed some invisible line. Show me, he said. She led him inside. The firewood wall rose along the north side of the cabin, 5 feet high now, 3 feet deep, the entire length of the wall. Einar reached out, pressed his palm against the stacked wood. It was warm. The sensation triggered a memory so sudden and vivid it took his breath. His mother's cottage in Telemark, Norway. Wood stacked inside along the north wall, her voice patient, explaining to a boy who didn't understand. The forest inside, the wood holds the warmth. He had forgotten. For 30 years in Dakota, 11 brutal winters, he had forgotten what his own mother had taught him. My mother did this, he said quietly. In Telemark, I had forgotten. Kate's voice was small, hopeful. Will it work? Einar pulled his hand back, stared at the wall that defied everything he thought he knew about Dakota winters. I don't know, he admitted. Logic says no. You need 5 cords, you have 2.5. But logic also said you shouldn't still be alive to this point. And here you are. He walked to the door, stopped, could not look at her when he spoke. I was wrong to tell you to leave. Silence. Maybe. We'll see. He left quickly before she could respond, before he could take the words back. Riding home, Einar felt something shifting inside him. Not a dramatic change, just a crack. A small fissure in the certainty he had built like armor around his heart. He had been so sure. About Dakota, about winter, about what it took to survive. But a widow from Boston with soft hands and a grandmother's memory was doing something different, something he had once known and forgotten, something that might, against all logic and experience, actually work. And if she survived, if those children lived, then everything he thought he knew would need to be questioned. The thought was terrifying. The thought was, in a strange way, exhilarating. November came with wind that cut like knives and temperatures that dropped below freezing and stayed there. The world began its transformation from gold to white. The easy season was ending. The test was beginning. And Einar Thorvaldsen, who had been so certain about who would live and who would die, found himself riding past the Morrison cabin every week, watching for smoke from the chimney, checking for signs of life. Not helping, just observing. That was what he told himself. But in the dark hours before dawn, alone in a house built for two, he knew the truth. He cared. And caring, after 6 years of careful numbness, after 6 years of keeping the world at arm's length to avoid the pain of loss, was the most dangerous thing he could do. Because in Dakota, caring about someone was the first step toward burying them. And Einar Thorvaldsen had buried enough people to last a lifetime. The snow continued to fall. The temperature continued to drop. And somewhere between judgment and mercy, between certainty and doubt, between the widow he had condemned and the man he thought he was, Einar felt the first stirrings of something he had not experienced in years. Hope. It was a small thing, fragile, easily crushed by the cold mathematics of a Dakota winter. But it was there, and it would change everything. December arrived with the kind of cold that turned breath into ice crystals before it left your mouth. The thermometer outside Einar's kitchen window read 15 degrees below zero on the morning of the 5th, and that was at noon, when the pale sun offered its weakest reassurance that warmth still existed somewhere in the universe. Einar had developed a routine he refused to call what it was. Every week he would ride past the Morrison cabin on his way to check his livestock, to inspect his fences, to do any of a dozen tasks that coincidentally required him to pass within sight of that small structure with its impossibly fragile walls. He told himself he was simply monitoring an experiment, a test of conventional wisdom against desperate innovation. Nothing more. The truth sat heavier in his chest. On the first Monday of December, he rode past and saw smoke rising steady from the chimney. Kate was outside, moving slowly but methodically, splitting wood with an axe that looked too heavy for her frame. Martha stood nearby, stacking the split pieces with careful precision. Eric played in the snow, his laughter carrying across the frozen air like bells. Einar did not stop, just nodded once as he passed. Kate straightened, saw him, nodded back. No words, no acknowledgement of the half-cord of wood he had brought, no discussion of the wall growing inside her cabin. Just two people who understood that winter was here, and talking about it changed nothing. The second week, the temperature dropped to 5 degrees. The smoke from Morrison's chimney still rose steady and strong. Kate was inside this time, too cold to work outside. But the cabin held heat. Einar could tell by the way frost formed on every other building in sight, but seemed lighter on the Morrison walls. The wall was working. Maybe. He found himself thinking about thermal mass, about how wood absorbed heat during the day when the stove burned hot, then released it slowly through the long, frozen nights. About his mother's cottage in the forest inside that he had forgotten until a desperate widow reminded him. The third week brought a blizzard warning. Einar stopped this time, actually dismounted, knocked on the door. Kate answered, surprise clear on her face. "Storm coming," Einar said without preamble. "Big one. Do you have enough wood inside?" "Yes, the wall is still 3/4 full." He looked past her into the cabin. Warm. At least 50 degrees, he estimated. The water bucket showed no ice. The children played near the stove, healthy and unbothered by the cold that was killing livestock across the territory. "Good," he said. He turned to leave. "Mr. Thorvaldsen." He stopped but did not turn around. "What?" "Thank you for the wood and for checking on us." His shoulders stiffened. "I'm not checking on you. I just don't want my horse standing outside in a blizzard when I have to come retrieve your bodies." But there was something in his voice this time. Something that might have been the ghost of humor. Kate heard it. He knew she did. The storm hit that night, 3 days of howling wind and snow that piled in drifts higher than a man's head. Einar sat in his solid house, warm and safe, and thought about a cabin 3/4 of a mile away, with walls thin enough to see daylight through. When the storm cleared, he rode past again. Smoke still rose from the chimney. He exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. Christmas Day came sharp and brutal, the kind of cold that made the world seem carved from glass. The thermometer outside the Lindquist cabin, Clara would later report, read 25 below zero. Animals refused to leave their shelters. Men refused to let their families travel. Einar sat alone at a table meant for 8. Before him lay a meal generous enough for a celebration. Ham from the pig he had slaughtered in November, potatoes from his root cellar, bread he had baked himself with hands more accustomed to splitting wood than kneading dough. 8 chairs, 1 man. The silence was heavy enough to have weight. He thought about Ingrid, about their last Christmas together in '80. She had been pregnant then, hopeful, talking about the child who would sit at this table the following year. Planning names, imagining futures. By the next Christmas, she was dead. The baby was dead. And Einar had learned that hope was a luxury Dakota could not afford. The knock on the door startled him from memories he tried not to revisit. He opened it to find Martha Morrison standing in the brutal cold holding a basket covered with cloth. "Child, what are you doing out in this weather?" Martha looked up at him with eyes far too serious for 6 years old. "Mama said you might be lonely. I brought bread and butter." Einar stared at the basket. Humble offerings. From a woman who had almost nothing to a man who had plenty. "Your mother sent food to me when she barely has enough," Martha nodded solemn. "Mama says Christmas is about sharing what you have, not what you have extra." The words hit him like a physical blow. He bent down, bringing himself to the child's eye level. "Thank you, and thank your mother. But take this back to Eric. I have too much food. Your mother needs it more." Martha shook her head with the stubborn certainty of childhood. "Mama said you would say that. She said to give it to you anyway. Because winter is not just about wood. It is about knowing you are not alone." Einar felt something crack in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 6 years, since Ingrid died. Since he had decided that feeling nothing was safer than feeling everything. He straightened, throat tight. "All right, I will keep the bread, but wait here." He went inside and returned with a jar of cherry preserves from his cellar, unopened, saved for a special occasion that had never come. "Give this to your mother, for Eric, from my garden." Martha took the jar, cradling it carefully. She smiled, a genuine expression of pure joy that transformed her serious face into something luminous. Einar watched her run back across the snow toward the cabin, the jar clutched against her chest like treasure. He stood in the doorway until she disappeared inside. Then he closed the door, sat back at his table, and stared at the bread she had brought. For 6 years, he had told himself it was better not to feel, better not to care, because caring meant hurt, and he had been hurt enough. But perhaps, he thought as he broke the bread and found it still warm, perhaps not caring was its own kind of death. Perhaps the widow Morrison understood something about survival that had nothing to do with cords of wood and everything to do with the human heart. He ate alone. But for the first time in 6 years, the silence felt less like a grave and more like a space waiting to be filled. 2 miles to the east, Johan Berglund sat in his cabin and felt the deep satisfaction of a man who had done everything right. 6 cords of firewood, seasoned elm, stacked perfectly along the south wall of his cabin in neat rows that spoke of preparation and foresight. He had used 1.5 cords since November. At this rate, he would finish winter with 3 cords remaining. A cushion, insurance, proof that learning from mistakes was the path to survival. 2 days after Christmas, he rode to Einar's farm, face red from cold, but eyes bright with confidence. "Mr. Thorvaldsen, I made it through December." Einar looked up from the barn where he was checking his horses. "Congratulations. December is the easy month. January and February are the killers." Johan dismounted, grinning. "I know, but I have 6 cords. I have only used a quarter of my supply. Even if the worst comes, I am prepared." They walked together to check Johan's setup. Einar examined the woodpile with the critical eye of someone who had seen preparation mean the difference between life and death. It was impressive, 4.5 cords remaining, dried, accessible, stacked with care along the south wall where Johan could easily reach it even in the deepest snow. "You have done well," Einar said. High praise from a man who gave compliments as rarely as Dakota gave mercy. "This is how you survive. Preparation, discipline, following proven methods." Johan beamed. "I learned from the best." They stood together in the cold, two men bound by the shared understanding of what it took to outlast a Dakota winter. Have you heard about Mrs. Morrison? Johann asked. Einar's expression shifted, became guarded. What about her? She is still alive, with that crazy indoor woodpile. I know. Johann laughed not unkindly. How much wood does she have? Perhaps 2.5 cords total. Johann whistled low. Half of what you said was minimum. She will be dead by February. Something defensive moved in Einar's voice. Perhaps, or perhaps there are things I do not know about wood and heat. Johann's laughter faded. He looked at Einar with confusion. You not know about Dakota winters. You have been here 11 years. 11 years taught me that I do not know everything, Einar said quietly. Only enough to survive. There is a difference. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Johann changed the subject. Anyway, I am confident. This year will be much easier than last. The words triggered something in Einar, an automatic response born from 11 winters of hard lessons. Never be confident about a Dakota winter, Johann. The moment you think you have won, winter kills you. Johann smiled, still easy, still certain. I will be careful. Einar watched the young man ride away and felt an unease he could not name. Johann had done everything right, had more wood than necessary, was strong, smart, prepared by every measure that mattered. He should be fine. But Einar remembered feeling that same confidence once, in '81 before Ingrid died. Before he learned that Dakota did not care how confident you were, how prepared you thought you had become. The unease followed him home and settled in his bones like the cold. The old settler found Einar in town a week later, gripped his arm with hands gnarled from decades of work. I built the Morrison Wall, the man said. He was in his 70s, face weathered like ancient wood. In '89, after you taught the method. It saved my family in the blizzard of '93. I owe that woman my grandchildren's lives. Einar nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude but unable to deny the truth in it. More people came. A widow in her 60s who had survived 4 winters alone after her husband died each winter, made bearable by the wall of wood that held heat through the longest nights. A bachelor who had built his wall crude and rough but effective, who swore it cut his fuel consumption by 1/3. The method was spreading, quietly, without fanfare. From neighbor to neighbor, family to family, the knowledge passing like a secret that saved lives. But that was later, in the future, after the test that would prove whether innovation or convention held the key to survival. In early January of 1888, the method was still just a widow's desperate gamble, an old man's half-forgotten memory, a wall of wood that might work or might simply be a monument to madness. The test was coming. Everyone could feel it. January 11th dawned wrong. Einar woke at 6 in the morning as he always did, went to the kitchen window to check the thermometer as he always did, and stared at the reading with disbelief that turned slowly to dread. 35 degrees Fahrenheit. In January. In Dakota. He checked the thermometer again, tapped the glass, looked outside at the world bathed in pale morning light. Snow melting, water dripping from the eaves, birds singing, the air carrying the impossible scent of spring. Every instinct Einar possessed screamed that this was wrong. He dressed quickly and went outside. The temperature was rising. By 9 in the morning it had climbed to 40 degrees. Men emerged from their homes without coats, stunned by the sudden warmth. Women hung laundry that had been frozen stiff for weeks. Children played in the mud created by melting snow, their laughter echoing across the prairie. The mood was jubilant, relieved. Everyone saying the same thing in different words. Winter is over. We survived. God is merciful. Einar felt only growing unease. He rode to Huron 12 miles and found the town transformed. People on the streets. Shops open. Men discussing plans to plant early to take advantage of this unprecedented warmth. Reverend Gunderson found him outside the general store. Praise God, Einar winter has released its grip. Einar scanned the horizon. Clear blue sky. Not a cloud visible. But to the northwest, at the very edge of vision, he saw something. A darkness. A line too straight to be natural. I do not think God is being merciful, Reverend. I think he is setting a trap. Gunderson frowned. You see clouds? No, but I see what comes before clouds. Inside the store, the owner was expansive, talkative, already planning his inventory for an early spring season. The thermometer outside his window read 42 degrees and climbing. Einar stared at that number and felt ice form in his stomach. 42 degrees. In January. In Dakota. Warm air rushing in from the south, which meant somewhere to the north, cold air was being displaced, pushed, compressed, building pressure. And when it came south, when the cold front collided with this false spring, the violence of that meeting would be catastrophic. He rode home faster than was safe, drove his horses harder than he liked. At his farm, he worked with fevered intensity, moved horses into the barn and sealed it tight, stacked extra hay inside where it could not be buried, filled water troughs while the water still flowed, brought a full cord of wood into his house for the first time ever, stacking it along the interior wall, learning from Kate Morrison, from the madness that might be wisdom. He filled his bathtub with water before the well could freeze, sealed windows with extra blankets, checked every seal, every gap, every place where cold could find entry. And then he rode east to Johan Bergland's cabin. Johan was outside in shirt sleeves, enjoying the warmth like a gift. "You need to bring wood inside," Einar said without greeting. "Now, as much as you can carry." Johan looked at the clear sky, the melting snow, the impossible warmth. "Why, the weather is beautiful." "Too beautiful. Storm is coming." "I do not see any clouds." "Not yet, but look northwest. Do you see that dark line?" Johan squinted, shook his head. "I see clear sky. That line is a cold front, and when it arrives, it will arrive fast. You need wood inside, accessible, where you can reach it without going outside." Johan's expression shifted, patient, the way you looked at an elderly relative who was becoming confused. "Mr. Thorvaldsen, I appreciate your concern, but I have 4.5 cords stacked perfectly outside. Even if a storm comes, I can simply step out and get what I need." Einar felt desperation rise in his throat. "If this storm is what I think it is, you will not be able to step outside. You will freeze 15 feet from your door." The specific number hung in the air between them. Too specific. Too dark. Johan laughed. Not cruel, just disbelieving. "You are being dramatic, but I thank you for caring." Einar stared at the young man, saw the confidence, the certainty born from doing everything right, the belief that preparation guaranteed survival. He recognized it because he had felt it himself once. For Dakota taught him that the only guarantee was uncertainty. "I hope I am wrong," Einar said quietly. "I truly hope I am wrong." He turned his horse and rode toward the Morrison cabin. Kate was outside with the children, letting them play in the unprecedented warmth. Martha and Eric chased each other through slush, their voices bright with joy. "Mrs. Morrison!" Einar called from horseback loud enough to carry across the yard. Kate turned surprised to see him. "Do you have wood inside?" "Yes, the wall is still more than half full." "Why, good. Keep the children inside. Storm is coming." Kate looked at the clear sky. "But it is so warm." "I know it is warm, but trust me, you are fortunate to have wood inside. Do not leave the cabin for any reason when the storm hits." When Einar looked northwest, the dark line was thicker now, advancing, still miles away but moving with unnatural speed. Soon, perhaps 2 hours, perhaps 3. The children, inside now. The urgency in his voice penetrated. Kate called to Martha and Eric. They ran to her, sensing the sudden tension. "Do you have food?" Einar asked. "Bread, salt, pork, potatoes." "Enough for 3 days." Kate nodded. "Good. Keep the fire burning. Keep the children warm. And Mrs. Morrison, if I am right about this storm, your wall may save your life." "What about you?" The question surprised him. "Me? Do you have enough wood inside?" Einar felt something warm move through his chest despite the growing cold. "No, but I just brought a cord in. Learned from you." Kate's eyes widened. "You built a wall." "Not a wall, just brought wood inside because a stubborn widow showed me that sometimes the old ways are better than the new ones." He rode away quickly before she could respond. Behind him, Kate herded the children inside and closed the door. Above them, all the sky remained clear and blue and beautiful. And to the northwest, the black wall continued to rise. At 3 in the afternoon, the temperature was still 38 degrees. Children played in the streets of Huron. Men made plans. Women smiled. At 3:15, the wind shifted. It happened in seconds. The gentle southern breeze died. For one moment, the air was perfectly still. Then the northwest wind arrived like a freight train. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 5 minutes. By 3:30, it was 18 degrees and falling. By 4, it was 5 degrees. By 5, it was 10 below zero. An 80-degree plunge in less than 2 hours. And with the cold came the wind. 50 miles per hour, 60. Gusts that shook buildings and turned the world into a howling chaos of white. The children who had played in the streets of Huron tried to walk home. 13 of them made it less than 2 miles before the cold took them. They were found later, frozen in drifts, some holding hands, some curled alone, all dead. The men who had been working outside rushed for shelter. Some made it, some did not. The Hollister father, checking his livestock in the barn, lost his way in the whiteout between the barn and his house. 12 feet. He was found the next morning frozen solid, one hand outstretched toward the door he could not find. And in cabins across the territory, families huddled around stoves and burned through their carefully rationed wood supplies at terrifying speed, trying to hold back a cold that had come without warning and showed no mercy. In his solid house, Einar sat by his stove and fed it wood from the cord he had brought inside. The temperature in the house dropped despite the fire. 50 degrees, 45. He could see his breath, but the wood was there, accessible. He did not have to brave the killing cold outside. He thought about Kate Morrison, about 2 children in a thin-walled cabin and a wall of wood that might or might not be enough. He thought about Johan Berglund, about 4.5 cords of perfect firewood stacked outside, unreachable beneath sudden massive drifts. He thought about children walking home from school in sunshine, never arriving. And he prayed, for the first time since Ingrid died. Not elegant prayers, just desperate words thrown into the darkness. Let them live. Please. Let Kate and those children live. Let Johan reach his woodpile. Let the children find shelter. Let me be wrong about how bad this is. But he was not wrong. Outside, the wind screamed like the end of the world. Inside, an old man fed his fire and counted the cost of certainty. The wind died at 8:15 on the morning of January 13th. Not gradually, not with warning. It simply stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind a silence so profound that Einar could hear his own heartbeat in the stillness. He had not slept, had spent the night feeding wood into the stove, listening to the house groan under the assault of wind that felt like it wanted to tear the world apart. The temperature inside had dropped to 40 degrees despite the roaring fire. Outside, he could only imagine. Now, in the terrible quiet, he moved to the window and scraped away the thick frost with his fingernails. The world beyond was white, not the soft white of fresh snow. This was crystalline, glittering hard, every surface coated in ice. The sun rose pale and cold in a sky of frozen blue, and the light reflecting off the snow was painful to look at. The thermometer read 35 degrees below zero, but the storm was over. Einar, dressed in layers, wool, fur, everything he owned that could hold heat. Then he went to the barn, saddled his horse with hands that shook from more than cold, and rode toward the Morrison cabin. He told himself he was simply checking on livestock, assessing damage, being a responsible neighbor. The truth sat in his throat like stones. He was riding to count the dead. The drifts were massive. In places, they rose higher than his horse's head. The animal struggled through snow that came to its chest, breathing hard, eyes rolling with the effort. What should have been a 15-minute ride took nearly an hour. As the Morrison cabin came into view, Einar felt his breath catch. The south wall was buried under a drift that reached the roof. The chimney was visible, black against white, but no smoke rose from it. No smoke. His heart stopped. No smoke meant no fire. No fire meant no heat. No heat meant he kicked the horse forward, desperate now, waded through the final drift and dismounted near the door. "Mrs. Morrison!" His voice cracked on her name. Silence. He pounded on the door with his fist hard enough to hurt. "Kate!" Then from inside, muffled but unmistakable a voice. "Mr. Thorvaldsen." The relief that flooded through him was so intense it made him dizzy. The door opened. Kate stood there, exhausted, face pale but alive. Behind her, Martha held Eric wrapped in blankets. Both children alive. All 3 alive. Einar stepped inside and felt the warmth hit him like a physical presence. The cabin was warm, not hot, but at least 50 degrees, warm enough to survive. The stove held no fire, but along the north wall, the firewood wall stood diminished but still present, two-thirds of its original height. And when Einar pressed his hand against it, he felt heat radiating from the wood. The wall had worked. Against every prediction, every calculation, every certainty, he had held the wall had worked. "You survived," he said. His voice broke on the word. Kate smiled, exhausted but genuine. The wall held. Einar ran his hand over the stacked wood, feeling the warmth that had kept his family alive through a night that had killed dozens. My God, it actually worked. "Eric was sick last night," Kate said. "High fever, but it broke this morning." Einar looked at the boy, pale, thin, but his eyes were clear. "Are you well, son?" Eric's voice was small but steady. "I am hungry, sir." Einar laughed. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, but real. "If you are hungry, you will live." He turned back to Kate. "I was wrong about everything. You did not need 5 chords. You needed the right 3 chords. And this wall," he tapped the wood, "this is genius." Kate's eyes filled with tears. "I was terrified all night, afraid the wall would not be enough, afraid I had killed my children with madness." "Not madness," Einar said firmly. "Wisdom. Wisdom I forgot. Wisdom my mother knew and I forgot because of pride, because I thought the Dakota way was the only way." He paused, then asked the question he was dreading. "Mr. Johan Berglund," Martha's small voice came from behind her mother. "Is Mr. Johan safe?" Einar's expression darkened. "I have not checked, but I go there now." Kate understood. He saw it in her face. "You think—" "I know," Einar said quietly. He left quickly before the warmth of their survival could be tainted by what he knew he would find 2 miles to the east. The ride to Johan Berglund's cabin took even longer. The drifts here were worse, piled by wind that had screamed across open prairie with nothing to slow it. Johan's cabin appeared through the white like a ship emerging from fog. The south wall where the woodpile had stood was buried completely under snow. 6 feet deep, maybe more. No smoke rose from the chimney. Einar dismounted and waded to the door. It was bowed outward pressure from inside. The same sign he had seen at the Larson cabin 2 years before. He put his shoulder to the door and pushed. Ice cracked. The door swung open. The cold inside was absolute. The same temperature on the outside. No heat retention, no warmth. The stove sat cold and empty in the corner. And 15 feet from the door, face down on the floor, lay Johan Berglund. Einar crossed the distance and knelt beside the body. Johan was frozen solid. His coat was half on, pulled over one shoulder as if he had been trying to dress while running. His boots sat by the door. His feet were wrapped in blankets. The story wrote itself in the frozen tableau. Johan had run out of fuel around midnight. The indoor supply, exhausted. He had needed to reach the outdoor woodpile. But the pile was buried under 6 feet of drift. He had tried to dig, barehanded in the killing cold, made it perhaps 3 feet into the drift before his hands froze and he could not continue. He had tried to return inside, but in the whiteout and the chaos of wind and snow, he had missed the door by 15 feet. He had collapsed, and the cold had taken him in minutes. Johan Berglund, 24 years old, strong, prepared, doing everything right by every measure that mattered, dead 15 feet from his door, 20 feet from 4.5 cords of perfect firewood. Einar reached out with a shaking hand and touched Johan's shoulder. The body was hard as stone. "You did everything right," Einar said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Everything I told you, 6 chords, seasoned perfectly, stacked properly. You listened to me about everything." Tears froze on his cheeks as they fell. "Except the last thing, when I told you to bring wood inside. You thought I was being paranoid, too careful, and you were wrong. And I should have made you listen, should have forced you, should have done something more than just warn and walk away." He stood, looked around the cabin. Evidence of Johan's fight for survival littered the space. Furniture broken and partially burned. The edge of one wall charred where he had tried to burn the logs themselves. Blankets torn and stuffed into the stove. Everything consumed in desperate attempts to generate heat. Johann had fought until he had nothing left to burn, and then he had tried to reach the unreachable woodpile, and he had died. Einar covered the body with a blanket and walked outside. The sun was higher now, the light on the snow was blinding. Beautiful, merciless. He looked toward the buried woodpile, knelt and began digging with his hands. 3 feet down he found the top of the stack. Perfect elm, dry, ready to burn, enough to last 2 winters. Unreachable because buried beneath snow. He stood and looked back at the cabin where a young man lay frozen. Location matters more than quantity, Einar said to the empty air. Accessibility matters more than preparation. Kate Morrison with 2 cords inside survived. You with 4.5 cords outside died. He mounted his horse and rode back toward his farm. But he did not go home. He rode from homestead to homestead, checking on neighbors, counting survivors, cataloging the dead. Over the next 3 days, the news came in pieces. Each piece a small horror that accumulated into something vast and terrible. The Person family, 12 miles west. The father had severe frostbite on both hands from trying to reach the woodpile repeatedly through the night. 3 fingers would need to be amputated. The family had survived by burning their furniture, their door, their window frames. Everything combustible. The Hollister family, 4 miles north. The father dead, found 12 feet from his house, one hand outstretched toward the door. He could not find in the whiteout. The widow Jensen, 10 miles east. Dead with her 2 children, frozen together in their bed. They had run out of fuel and had no strength left to burn anything else. The Olson family, 15 miles north. Alive. The father, only 30 years old but built like an ox, had dug through drifts every 2 hours all night long to reach his outside woodpile. His hands were destroyed. Permanent nerve damage. But his family lived. And the children. 17 children who had left Huron school at 2:30 in the afternoon, sent home early because the weather was so beautiful. The storm had hit at 3:15. 13 bodies found within 2 miles of the school. 4 survivors who had stayed at the school when the teacher, seeing the black wall rising, refused to let them leave. Ages 6 to 14. Children who had walked to school in shirt sleeves in sunshine, laughing and playing. Never coming home. The final count within 20 miles of Einar's farm, 29 dead. Across the entire Dakota Territory, 235 confirmed deaths. Maybe more in isolated areas where no one would find the bodies until spring. The worst blizzard in American history for civilian casualties. The school children's blizzard, they would call it. The children's storm. January 12, 1888. The day that came in sunshine and left in death. On January 15th, Einar sat alone in his house and wrote in the journal he had kept since arriving in Dakota. The list took 2 pages. People he could have saved. People who might have lived if he had acted differently. Johann Berglund. If he had forced the young man to bring wood inside instead of just suggesting it. The 13 school children. If he had ridden to town when he saw the signs. If he had raised the alarm. If he had demanded they keep the children at school. Widow Jensen and her 2 children. If he had warned her as he had warned Kate Morrison. 4 other families within his range who he knew personally. Who trusted his judgment. Who would have listened if he had spoken. He calculated conservatively. 20 people. 20 people who might have lived if he had acted on his instincts instead of doubting them. If he had valued being safe over being right. But he had stayed silent, had warned only 2 people, because he was not certain, because he feared being wrong again after being wrong about Kate Morrison, because his pride could not bear the thought of looking like a fool if the storm did not come. So he had said nothing, and 20 people had died. He wrote the final line in his journal with a hand that shook. I knew, and I did nothing. Their blood is on my hands. I will carry this until I die. He closed the journal, sat in the silence of his house, and felt the full weight of survival. He had lived. His farm was intact. His livestock mostly survived. He had food and fuel enough to last until spring. But the price of his survival was counted in names he would never forget. Johann Berglund, Anna Jensen, her children Marie and Soren, the Hollister father whose name was Thomas, 13 children whose names he would learn and memorize and carry like stones in his chest. The cold had killed them, but his silence had let them die, and that was a different thing entirely. The memorial service was held on January 20th in the Lutheran Church in Huron. The building was packed beyond capacity. Survivors, families of the dead, everyone who had felt the storm's touch. Reverend Gunderson stood at the pulpit, his face grave, his voice carrying the weight of pastoral authority. "We gather to remember those taken from us," he began, "to mourn the innocent, to seek comfort in God's plan, though his ways are mysterious and his purposes beyond our understanding." He spoke of faith, of accepting God's will, of the blessing of survival and the tragedy of loss. Those who survived were blessed by God's grace. Those who died were called home to heaven. We cannot know why some were taken and others spared. We can only trust in his wisdom. The sermon continued in this vein, comfortable, reassuring, absolving everyone of responsibility by placing it all on divine providence. Einar sat in the back pew and felt something building in his chest. Pressure, heat, anger that had nowhere to go. When Gunderson finished and asked if anyone wished to speak, Einar stood. The movement drew every eye in the church. He walked to the front, faced the congregation, faced the families of the dead and the survivors in the community that had looked to him for guidance. "Reverend Gunderson says this was God's will," Einar said. His voice was steady but loud. "I disagree." A murmur ran through the crowd. "This was not God's will. This was our failures. My failures." The church went silent. I knew the storm was coming. On the morning of January 12th, I saw the signs. The temperature too high. The cold front approaching. I knew. He paused. Let that sink in. I warned two people, Johan Berglund and Kate Morrison. Johan did not listen. Johan died. Kate listened. Kate lived. He looked directly at the father of one of the dead children. The man stared back, face pale, fists clenched. But I did not warn the school, did not warn the town, did not raise the alarm, because I was not certain, because I feared being wrong, because of pride. The father stood, voice breaking. "You are saying you could have boofed them, you could have saved my son." Einar did not flinch. "Yes, and I did not. And he is dead because of my cowardice. I am sorry. The words are not enough, but they are the truth." Other voices rose, angry, grief-stricken. "You could have saved them. Murderer. My daughter would be alive if you had spoken." Einar stood and let the words hit him. Did not defend himself, did not make excuses. Gunderson tried to restore order. "Einar, this is not the time." "This is exactly the time," Einar interrupted. He turned back to the congregation. "Reverend wanted to take Kate Morrison's children. Said she was mad for building a woodpile inside her house. I defended her barely, but I still thought she was wrong." He pointed toward where Kate sat with Martha and Eric. "She lived, her children lived. Because of the madness, we condemned." He looked around the church. "Johan Berglund did everything right, everything I taught him. 6 cords of wood, perfect preparation, following every rule. He died 15 feet from his door." The words hung in the air. Kate Morrison did everything wrong by conventional wisdom. 2.5 cords, wood stored inside, against every tradition. She lived. He let that paradox settle. "We thought we knew Dakota, knew the rules, knew how to survive, but our pride killed people. My pride killed people." His voice dropped but remained clear. "I have lived 11 winters here, buried my wife, buried neighbors, seen what the cold can do, and I have never seen anyone survive a night like that with 3 cords of wood." He looked directly at Kate. "Mrs. Morrison, would you stand?" Kate rose slowly, uncertain. "This woman," Einar said, "whom we called maid, whom we judged, whom we threatened, saved her children with wisdom we had forgotten. Wisdom from her grandmother in Norway. Wisdom I once knew and dismissed because I thought Dakota was different." He turned back to the congregation. "Dakota is different, but cold is cold. Heat is heat. Physics does not change." He paused. "I will spend the rest of my life teaching Mrs. Morrison's method. Free. To anyone who will listen. And I will never again let pride stop me from warning when I see danger." He looked at the grieving families. "I cannot bring your children back. Cannot undo my failure. But I can promise you this. I will make sure their deaths mean something. I will make sure others learn, so that no more children walk to school in sunshine and never come home. His voice broke on the final words. He sat down. The church was silent. Then slowly Clara Lindquist stood. Mr. Thorvaldsen, you say you were wrong about Mrs. Morrison. What do you think now? Einar stood again. I think she is a genius. And we were fools. And if we are wise, we will learn from her instead of judging her. He looked at Gunderson. Reverend, you will not take those children. Mrs. Morrison proves she can protect them better than anyone in this room. Gunderson had no response. Einar's final statement came quiet but clear. I came here to admit my failures, to apologize to those I did not save, and to promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure people learn from this disaster. He sat, the silence stretched. Then one by one people began to leave. Some glared at him with anger that would never fully fade. Others nodded with understanding, born from their own failures and regrets. And Kate Morrison, holding her children's hands, met his eyes across the church and mouthed two words. Thank you. It was not forgiveness. Einar did not deserve forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition. The beginning of something that might in time approach redemption. 5 days after the memorial, Einar rode to the Morrison cabin carrying his supplies. Flour, salt, dried beef, luxuries he could spare, and she desperately needed. Kate met him at the door, surprised. Mr. Thorvaldsen, I did not expect. I owe you, he said simply. More than bread and eggs, I owe you for teaching me humility. Inside, the children played near the stove. Healthy, recovering, alive. Einar set the supplies down. These are from my farm, not charity, trade, for the lesson you taught me. Kate's eyes were puzzled. What lesson? That experience is not wisdom. That 11 years in Dakota does not mean I know everything. That sometimes the newcomer sees problems differently and better. He sat at her table, invited by gesture. I have spent 11 years being right, he continued, being the expert, the man people came to for advice, and I was right about many things. But I was wrong about you, wrong about the wall, and my certainty, my pride in being right killed people. Kate's voice was soft. You could not have known the storm would be so severe. I knew enough to be worried, enough to warn you and Johan, but not enough to act boldly, to raise the alarm, to insist. He met her eyes. 29 people died. I could not have saved all of them, but I could have saved some, and I did not, because I was afraid of being wrong. And now I will teach your method to every homesteader who will listen. I will tell them how you survived with 3 cords when conventional wisdom said you needed 5, how the wall saved you. Kate shook her head. It is not my method. It was my grandmother's. Then your grandmother's wisdom saved you, and I forgot my mother's wisdom because I thought I knew better. He stood. I will visit weekly, check your supplies, help with heavy work, not charity, debt. I owe you for showing an old fool that he does not know everything. As he left, Kate called after him. Mr. Thorvaldsen, you cared. Even when you thought I was mad, you cared enough to warn me, to bring me wood. That matters. Einar paused but did not turn. Caring is not enough when people die. No, Kate agreed, but it is something. It is the beginning. He rode away, and for the first time since the storm felt something small and fragile stirring in his chest. Not redemption, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. Perhaps in time the weight he carried might become bearable. Perhaps the dead might forgive him even if he could never forgive himself. Perhaps. The years passed with the slow inevitability of seasons. By the winter of 1889, 7 homesteads in Beetle County had built interior woodpile walls. Einar supervised the construction, teaching the principles Kate Morrison had demonstrated. North wall, 4 feet deep, floor to ceiling if possible. Not charity, not even neighborliness in the traditional sense. Penance. Each wall he helped build was a prayer for the dead. Each family taught it was a small offering against the debt he carried. The method spread, neighbor to neighbor, family to family. Some called it the Morrison method. Others called it the Norwegian way. Most just called it common sense and wondered why no one had thought of it before. No one patented it. No one claimed ownership. The knowledge passed freely, saving lives in ways that could never be fully counted. Winter of '89 was mild, but the walls performed as promised. Reduced fuel consumption, warmer interiors, families reporting that children slept through the night comfortably for the first time. Kate Morrison's reputation transformed, from the mad widow to the woman who survived the children's blizzard. Visitors came from as far as Fargo to see the wall. Kate showed them patiently, never asking for payment, teaching the method with quiet competence. And Einar, who had once been known as the harsh judge, who knew everything about Dakota winters, became known as the humble elder, who encouraged questions and admitted mistakes freely. Not a comfortable transformation, but a necessary one. In 1895, Martha Morrison, 14 years old, began helping Einar teach new settlers the method. He noticed her talent for explanation, the way she could take complex ideas and make them accessible, the patience she showed with people who asked the same questions repeatedly. "You have a gift for teaching," he told her one day. "Have you thought about becoming a teacher?" Martha looked surprised. "Can women be teachers?" "Your mother survived a Dakota winter alone. Anything is possible." 4 years later, Martha Morrison became a teacher at Huron School. Her first lesson every year delivered to every new class was about January 12, 1888, about the children who walked to school in sunshine and never came home, about the importance of preparation, of listening to warnings, of understanding that nature gave no second chances, and about the wall that saved her life. Eric Morrison returned to Dakota in 1905, 20 years old, fresh from college in Boston, eyes bright with education and ideas. He found Einar, now 71, still farming, still teaching, still carrying the weight of 29 names. "Mr. Thorvaldsen, I am writing a paper about my mother," Eric said, "about the wall, for an engineering journal." Einar looked up from mending a fence. "A paper. Academic research. I want to prove scientifically why the wall worked. Thermal mass, heat retention, R values, the physics behind my mother's instinct." Einar set down his tools. "Your mother did not know physics. She just remembered her grandmother." "I know, but if I can prove it with mathematics, people will understand it is not superstition. It is science, verdictum." "Will that help?" Eric smiled. "It will make the method credible. Not just folk wisdom, but proven engineering." 7 years later, Eric published Historical Analysis of Thermal Mass in Frontier Architecture in the M1T Engineering Journal. The Morrison Wall was cited as an early example of passive solar heating. The calculations proved what Kate Morrison had known instinctively. Wood absorbed heat during the day and released it at night. A 4-foot-deep wall had sufficient thermal mass to significantly reduce fuel consumption while maintaining interior temperatures above freezing. The paper gave academic legitimacy to grandmother's wisdom. Einar read it with failing eyes, 78 years old, and felt something approaching peace. "Your mother proved it with survival," he told Eric. "You proved it with numbers. Together you made old knowledge into new understanding." He paused. "That is beautiful. Old wisdom and new science meeting. Finding truth together." Eric smiled. "You taught me that. By admitting you were wrong, by learning from my mother, by showing that strength is not refusing to change. Strength is changing when you must." February 18th, 1917. Einar Thorvaldsen lay in the hospital bed in Huron, 83 years old, pneumonia filling lungs that had breathed Dakota air for 40 years. Martha Morrison Walker sat at his bedside, pen in hand. Eric Morrison leaned forward, listening. The story was told. The confession was made. The weight had been shared. "Write it all," Einar whispered. His voice was failing. "The truth, not the legend, the failure and the redemption. The pride and the lesson." "What do you want people to remember?" Martha asked. Einar thought for a long moment. "Write that I spent my life thinking I knew Dakota, but a widow from Boston who had never seen a real winter taught me humility." He coughed, pain moving across his face. "Write that pride kills, that admitting you are wrong is harder than being right, that serving is better than judging. And," Eric prompted gently, "and write that I am sorry, to the 29 dead, to their families, to Johan Berglund, that I could have done more, should have done more." His breathing grew labored. "Tell your mother if she is in heaven when I arrive, tell her I finally admitted it. She was right, I was wrong, and I am grateful for that." His eyes closed, his breathing grew shallow. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Einar Thorvaldsen died, the last man who remembered the children's blizzard from the perspective of someone who could have changed it. The first man to teach the Morrison method to hundreds of families. A man who had been wrong and spent 3 decades trying to make it right. Not a hero, not a villain, just a human being who had learned too late that certainty was not wisdom, that pride was not strength, that admitting failure was the beginning of redemption. Outside the hospital window, snow fell softly on Huron, South Dakota. Inside, two people who had survived because a wall of wood held back the cold began to write. Not a legend, the truth, all of it. For a man who had learned to value truth more than reputation. For 29 people who deserved to be remembered. For a widow who had trusted her grandmother more than experts. And for everyone who would come after, who would need to know that sometimes survival meant doing things differently. That sometimes the mad one is the only sane person in the room. That sometimes a wall of wood inside a house is not madness. It is wisdom that saves lives. The wall still stands. Not in the Morrison cabin demolished in 1915, but in every home that learned the method. In every family that survived because someone remembered. In the lesson that humility matters more than pride. In the understanding that we do not know everything. And in the simple truth that sometimes the best way forward is to remember what we left behind. The wall stands and will stand as long as we remember, as long as we learn, as long as we have the humility to admit when we are wrong and the courage to change. Einar Thorvaldsen learned that lesson at terrible cost, but he learned it, and in learning he saved hundreds of lives. Not the 29 he lost, but hundreds more who would have died without the knowledge he spent 3 decades spreading. It was not enough to balance the scales, but it was something. And in the end, perhaps that is all any of us can do. Try to make the wrongs right. Try to turn failure into wisdom. Try to ensure that the dead did not die for nothing. The snow continued to fall. The story was written. And somewhere in a place beyond cold and wind and human failing, perhaps 29 souls looked down and understood. Pride killed them, but humility saved others, and that at least was something worth dying for. The wall stands.